Fan clubs. I love fan clubs. Yeah, back in the day, I was a member of the WFIA, but it was more than wrestling for me. I was also a member of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. Remember that song? Well, they had a club you could join, but you fill out the coupon in the comic books and you got your membership card. I was so proud to have it in my wallet, in my short pants. But one time I sent away to the Johnson Smith catalog 35 cents, all I had in the whole world. And I waited and I waited. Weeks went by. I ordered surprise package. It said worth much more. And finally, the magic day, the manila envelope came in the mail. With bated breath, I cut it open with a knife and looked inside the package. What did I get for all that money, that treasure, that 35 cents? I got a number 2 pencil and a penny compass. Upset, I trudged back to my room. And for the first time in my life, I realized there are people out there that will rip you off. Not a great memory. Not a great memory, I admit. But I admit this to you. Don't you miss that feeling of waiting by the mailbox for your special membership card or a toy or something like that? That's why I will always do mail order and I always send by money order. Mainly because I just like being a pain in the ass. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hello, Moosomin, Saskatchewan. How you doing? We actually have a listener there, so I figured I'd say hello to him or her. My name is Bob Smith, and this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Welcome back to the show. We got kind of an oddball show today, but I think it's going to be a good one. We have a special guest in Brad Drake, the president of the brand new revived WFIA. That's Wrestling Fans International Association. It's something you ought to check out as soon as possible. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to take a look at a handful of people that I consider to be the most underrated wrestlers of their era, particularly one who gets lambasted all the time, but he was a major, major, major star. And history has not treated him well. I'm going to defend this guy. So hang on for that one. Brad will be first up on the show, but podcasting, y'all, podcasting. My journey so far has been quite interesting. It has consisted of major successes, vast disappointments, fair weather friends, technical snafus, stop-starts, you name it. But I got to tell you, I'm having a blast, and it's a real joy to bring this show to you every week. I'm really looking forward to doing this for as long as it's seemly, or not unseemly, I should say. Because, I'm getting on in years. Like I said, I had a very important birthday this year, and I now really am officially outdated. But I think I have a lot to offer in imparting my love and joy for classic professional wrestling, 60s, 70s through the 90s. And we're going to have some guests on that I think will surprise you in the next few weeks. So stay with us, and I hope you enjoy what's coming up. It's worth the effort. That's what I'm trying to tell you all right now. Yeah, it gets aggravating. It really does. We had a technical snafu, as I mentioned on a previous show, maybe 2 previous shows, that really knocked the wind out of us for about a week. Mainly because we were riding a hot streak, and then all of a sudden, we couldn't check to see if we were, sustaining it or perpetuating it. So it was frustrating, very frustrating. But eventually, it all worked out, and we didn't miss a beat. We're right back in the toboggan, so to speak, as we head to the winter. So anyway, we're going to start the show with a really interesting fellow who's decided to revive one of the most popular fan associations in the history of pro wrestling. In fact, I always considered it number 1 back in the 70s and 80s. It is the WFIA. Bring him on right now, the one and only Brad Drake. Okay, gang, I've been really looking forward to this one for a long while. Our guest and I have been talking about doing a podcast together, having him come on here, and we finally have him on the show. And I'm excited because of the WFIA. It's back. And if you're an old school fan like I am, you will remember way back in the day, or you remember seeing the ads in every wrestling magazine, especially the Kaiser books and stuff like that. And I'm getting a really good vibe about this organization. So I want you to welcome from Illinois, speaking to us, Brad Drake, who is the president now. Am I got that correct?
It's actually the executive director is how they used to have it, so I kept it the same way, Bob, but I think it's the same difference. But it's a pleasure to be here, Bob. I'm glad to be on your show. I think you have a terrific show, and I appreciate what you do for wrestling.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just get right to the meat of it. What have you done in wrestling before this? Because I really don't know. And secondly, what led you to revive the WFIA?
Sure. I was involved in wrestling in the early 2000s. I trained for about 9 months. It may have been closer to a year with a local company outside of Chicago. It was the same company that CM Punk got his start with and a couple other names from the area. And I did just like everybody else did. I mean, we learned how to break down the ring, set the ring up. We were responsible for security at the shows. We were gophers. We ran for everybody. You know, you've got to run, get tape or get somebody beer or something like that. That's what we did while we trained. The training that we went through, it was complicated because we went through a bunch of different trainers. So it was like you would get a good vibe going with somebody and really start to learn. And then all of a sudden they'd change trainers on us. So it was interesting. So like I said, I did it. I trained for about 9 months to a year. I had some things in my career that prevented me from continuing to train with them. I never worked a match. I could have very easily. I had the training to do so. So in my personal job at that point, I was a union pipe fitter, and obviously that was lots of jobs with heavy overtime and stuff like that. So it was difficult to commit to training, on a Thursday, Friday night, that kind of stuff like we would do. So I moved on, and then, but was still very involved with wrestling. I started doing ring announcing. I started doing commentary for local promotions. There was a guy around my age that opened up a promotion about 100 miles away, a little bit further down in Illinois, and he's still running today. It's very successful, and I did a lot of work with him. And then I got this bug. A lot of people don't understand. Chicago wrestling, Illinois wrestling back then was still under the thumb of the Boxing and Wrestling Commission of Illinois. You had to have a promoter's license in order to run a show. And I can't remember exactly, but I think that license cost like $5,000 just to apply for it, and they could deny you. So there was only a handful of promotions running in Illinois back then, independent promotions. Well, that fell apart. I cannot remember if it's January of 01 or January of 02 when Illinois disbanded the commission. So then it was a free-for-all with independents, right? But we still had like Sam DeCero's Windy City was still a powerhouse back then. And there was a bunch of other smaller promotions that were running, and they were all segregated. If you worked for one, you couldn't work for another. It was that type of deal, true old school wrestling. That's the way it was. And I got it in my head that I was going to run a super show. I was going to run a tournament. So everybody told me I was crazy. It would never work. I was 20 years old at the time. And I pick up the phone and I start calling these promoters. I'm talking to Sam DeCero. I'm talking to all these people. And I'm saying, hey, I want to use your talent for a super show. And all I did was just be honest with these people and upfront. And they all let me use their talent. It was no problem. So and when I say me, my brother and I co-promoted. We started our own promotion, and we started running super shows. And we were running like pretty much a best of the best for the Midwest type thing. We had Ken Anderson, we had CM Punk, we had Ace Steel, a young Sean Davari won our tournament one year. A bunch of other names. Colt Cabana worked for us. Quite a few other guys. Austin Aries, when he was starting out, worked for us. And it was very exciting. It was a lot of fun. And we did those shows for about 4 years. Then we ran a little promotions. I remember CM Punk was our was our champion. And then something happened, Bob, that happens with independent wrestling. And that was we had our first show where we didn't make money and we only broke even. And that was the last show we ever ran.
No.
So that was my experience with wrestling. Of course, I was a lifelong fan beforehand. I was born in the early 80s. So my big first exposure to wrestling was obviously the WWF stuff because it was so accessible on television. But where I lived at in Illinois, we were so lucky. We got to see the Von Erichs with World Class. We got to see Crockett. We got to see the AWA. We had exposure. Sometimes we would even get Memphis and stuff like that. Some of the channels would pick them up late night. So we got exposure to all that in our area growing up. And, pro wrestling was the thing. And we were junkies and became lifelong fans. Mm-hmm. So as far as the WFIA, I listen to probably 7 podcasts, maybe even 8 now a week of classic wrestling podcasts. I can't get enough. I consider myself a very amateur historian. I just enjoy old wrestling, 70s, 80s. I'm in if I can read a book on it, if I can, pick up these old result sheets and that kind of stuff. I can't get enough of it. And I used to always hear a lot of these people on these podcasts talk about the WFIA, and I had no idea what it was. So I started doing, some searches online, and there really wasn't too much online outside of some videos that Dave Brzezinski had on YouTube. There was very little. And I thought to myself, if this organization is still around, I want to join because it sounds really cool what they do. Well, I eventually found out that it had pretty much been non-existent since about 1986. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a search on the Patent and Trade Office. I want to see if somebody owns the name. And it turns out that the trademark on it was long expired. So I picked up the trademark and I said, you know what? This is something that was really cool and meant a lot to a lot of people. I'm going to try to resurrect this and see what we can do. And I started the Facebook group, and then I started the process of actually organizing the WFIA, and it's been a lot of fun, and I've met some really great people, and we're organized. We have a full board with some great names on there.
Oh, go ahead and name the board, because it's like when I saw the board, that was the determining factor for me joining up. It really was.
Yeah.
Because it was like when I saw that board, I said, "This is serious. These are real wrestling people."
Yeah, absolutely. The first guy I reached out to was Brian Ferguson. I have a YouTube show that I run for a fantasy wrestling thing that I do, and Brian Ferguson has his Bumps and Thumps podcast. So I said, Brian, how about I run an ad for you? You run an ad for me type thing. So we kind of became friends, and Brian was one of the first guys I asked to be on the board, and he accepted. And then some of the original WFIA people were a little hesitant to get involved at first, and I don't blame them. It was somebody restarts something that you loved for a long time, you're gonna be hesitant, right? I mean, do that with anything, right?
Well, no, not only that. If they were involved with the original club, let's look at it this way. Probably the first question you got to play devil's advocate is, "Hey, who are you? And how are you involved?" Right? You probably felt that a little bit.
That's exactly what it was. I got some nasty messages on Facebook, and how I responded to it was I would just message them back and say, "Hey, do you got a few minutes on Saturday or Sunday? Can I give you a call? Can we talk about this?" And that's exactly what I did. I got to talk to several people, and they felt a lot better about it after that. And so that helped smooth the way. So George Shire was just an advisor for a while, but George has joined our board of directors. And, if you don't know, you should. George Shire is the ultimate historian on the AWA.
I just did a show with him. I just did the show I recorded before this one earlier this week. Has George on it. It was the first time we met, and we talked for about an hour and a half, and felt like I knew him for 15 years. He's one of those kind of guys.
He's absolutely terrific. George is one of my favorite people to talk to. He's terrific. We got another guy by the name of Rick Del Santo that's on the board.
I know Rick too. We've done the what called co-populate each other's podcasts. So I've been on his. He's been on mine.
Yeah, Rick's a great guy involved with the independent scene there in the Northeast, and He's got a terrific show too. Every week.
Yes, he does.
He's a hardworking guy when it comes to this. He's got a lot going.
He really does. He has a lot going on too, and he's a nice fella.
Yes, yes.
It's like you can tell he really loves it, and I think if you really have a passion for it, that's really all you need. And he's got a huge passion for it.
Yeah. Rick's great, and he's doing a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy we got on the board with is a guy by the name of Jason Monday. Jason, lifelong wrestling fan. He reached out to me. We were first getting going, and Jason's been a big help. Wonderful guy. He's down there, I think, in North Carolina, and terrific guy. He's actually the current chairman of our convention committee, and Jason's doing a terrific job helping to get things go with that. But we can talk about that later if you want, Bob. And we also have Dave Harold from the UK. Dave is a terrific wrestling fan from the UK. He was very involved with the independent scene over there. And Dave is a wealth of information when it comes to wrestling. Wonderful guy to talk to. And it's just a great board. When we have these board meetings once a month, it's like getting together with old friends. And then, of course, we have a couple special advisors, Dave Drayson Brzezinski. He's one of our advisors. Dave helps us out in the meetings, always gives us advice whenever he can. And then Tom Burke was one of the first guys I talked to about the WFIA, and Tom agreed to go on as a special advisor, and he's been a wealth of information too about the WFIA. Tom's another one that's just an incredible historian and just a wonderful guy to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for people like Tom, because when I was a kid first getting into sport, it was people like him that I read in the magazines. And he the fact that he's still kind of doing it, and to an extent, it just thrills me, because it's like these were my heroes. I knew who all these people were long before I worked at the wrestling magazine. So it was like too good. It's too good. It's like to have this type of a board, I think gives you a lot of credibility just getting started. So that's a nice job right there.
Well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's it's the whole plan with the WFIA is we're not trying to reinvent something. We have to an extent, because it's 2023, right? There's certain things that you did 30, 40 years ago that you just can't do nowadays that don't work that way, And so, but the intention is to make it feel as much as possible like the original WFIA. I think that our publication, Wrestling Fan News, we've gone to a great extent to try to make that look like the original issues of Wrestling Fan News and vintage wrestling magazines. And it's just been a blast, and we continue to grow. Things are going really well for us. And I never thought, when I started this in March, that it would catch on like this, but it really has. People have a longing for the past with wrestling, and people are also, new. We have a lot of new fans that are involved with the WFIA. It's a great fan organization, and we're just getting started.
Well, I want my listeners to know this. I joined a few months ago, and I want you to know that the thing that drew me in, the thing that made the bell go off for me, was the logo, which I believe was the original logo. Am I correct?
Heck yes, it's the original logo.
Oh my gosh, the strong man with the globe. I went, oh my gosh, it's the same feel. Now, I'm getting excited here, because it's like, this is what I felt when I saw what you guys were up to. So I see this logo, I go, I got to find out about this. So I did, and I putted around, found the website, immediately signed up, and it says it's free. So what happens next, old timers? I get a postcard in the mail. I don't get a postcard from relatives anymore. I get a postcard, and it says, "Congratulations, Bob, you're member number 188." I went, my God, it's the same thing. How did you get this vibe now that it was like then? You know what I'm saying? It's almost identical to and then the newsletter comes out with all these great writers in it. It's a black and white, which to me only enhances it. You know what I'm saying? Because it gives it that old school feel. To me, this is as good as it gets, man. I mean, it's, first of all, the price can't be better. And secondly, you are reconnecting, I think, people with not only old timers, but you're going to merge the old timers with the new audience. And I think that's pretty exciting. I don't know how you came up with all this, but wow. I'm going to say it again. Wow.
Well, thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that. I'm a vintage guy. I still listen to AM radio.
Heck, I'm guilty as charged on that one too. Yeah.
And to me, there was nothing more exciting than when you were a kid of getting like a membership card in the mail or getting like a postcard with an official thing. So I went and bought stamps. I had stamps made that had our official logo on it. So whenever I mail anything out with the club, I make sure to use that stamp. And then I even had another one that says official business of the Wrestling Fans International Association. That may have been on the other side of that postcard.
Probably was, right? I still have the card. I didn't throw it out. I'm saving that.
Well, you got to keep it. That's your official membership. Yeah.
I know. If there's ever a live convention, I'll probably have to show it, right?
you may have to. But that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing, is to try to recreate that feel. And if you talk to these original WFIA members, this was a really big deal in their life for a lot of them. A lot of people, some people listening to this may be too young, to really remember pre-internet stuff, but a lot of these people were pen pals. They sent each other wrestling results through the mail. That's how they communicated. And, another thing for younger people that may be watching this is, if you lived in a certain area, you didn't get somebody else's wrestling television. So you knew it existed from wrestling magazines and stuff like that, but you didn't know what was going on in the Northeast if you lived in the Midwest. So these people would actually, take match cards and send them to their friends around the country. And then people would start fan clubs, official fan clubs for wrestlers. And it was a really cool thing. And these people formed lifelong bonds and lifelong friendships.
Oh, yeah.
And, then of course, when Mr. Wilson formed the WFIA, was kind of bringing in all these people from these fan clubs. It was really like a family feel for these folks. And if you talk to them, they're all still super tight to this day. And it's a really, really special thing they had. And it's just something we're trying to get going again. I don't know if things could ever be that tight again in the digital world, but I feel like it's going that way.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I left Pro Wrestling Illustrated and its sister magazines in 1994, thereabouts, because they had moved. It was pre-internet, pre-cell phones. You had to be in an office to work for somebody back then. You couldn't do it remotely like you can now, doggone it. I would have still been there. But it was one of those situations where I simply couldn't move out of New York. They moved to Pennsylvania, and I just couldn't go. So I kind of ran from that job and ran out of the scene, and I did freelance for several magazines for about 5 years after that, and then I just stopped. I got burnt out and I stopped. But what you're doing with this club is kind of like I'm doing with this podcast. I'm reconnecting with my friends and fans, to be honest with you, from the old days and realizing you never should have shut that door. That's the way I feel. I had no idea how much people valued what I did at the magazines until I was heard on a podcast again. And then people came out of the woodwork, even old friends. I mean, it's been a magical experience. So segue to what you're doing. And now it's like a 70s vibe when I pick my $1 copy of the Ring Wrestling and see the ad in there. Boom, jackpot. I mean, this is, well, let's wheedle it down. It's fun, man. It's a lot of fun. That newsletter is the exact same vibe as a classic wrestling magazine. It reminds me of the old Kaiser books, the Ring Wrestling and Wrestling Review and stuff like that. It just has that old school feel, even right down to the advertising. But the beauty part is you're going to be educating younger fans while you're entertaining the older fans. And if we can have a nice merger of everybody, AEW fans and AWA fans, you know what I'm saying, all together, you got a movement. And that's going to make wrestling better. I think it will make pro wrestling better if we can all get on the same wavelength and not stop saying it was better in the old days or no, it's better now, that thing. And become a consortium of fans and wrestling professionals. It's got to be good.
Yeah, that's absolutely the goal. Absolutely, is to unite wrestling fans and to have fun in an organization, have a good time. And I feel that's a problem. And Dave Dynasty and I talked about that not too long ago. Is wrestling fans are just too divided nowadays, and it's like you can't like one and like the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a shame. There's a certain wrestling I don't like. I probably don't like 70% of new wrestling, right? but I'm not gonna
I'm right
yeah,
there with you. Yeah.
I'm not gonna go out of my way to blast it. I'm glad wrestling's still on television. I'm glad,
Well, yeah.
that it's still out there. And yeah, I think one of the goals of the WFIA is definitely to unite the old and the new fans. And I've said it, we have to make sure that there's wrestling still in existence in 25 years. That kind of thing, 50 years. We don't want this history to be lost. We
Right.
don't want wrestling to be lost.
You nailed it. I don't want the work of somebody like George Shire to be forgotten because the product changed. I really fear that the serious wrestling historians and the serious fans and the people who took wrestling seriously as a pseudo sport or sport even, if as wrestling has become more extreme and more theatrical and more television oriented, a faction of the public seems to not take it seriously at all, at all, at all. It's like a show like you see on Netflix. I worry that the work of people like George Shire and Bill Apter and Tom Burke and all the forefathers who led us to where we are now will be forgotten. I don't want that to happen. I want young people to be exposed to this old stuff. They can compare and contrast to what's going on now and learn how we got here, to where we are in the current wrestling scene. I think that's important. It gives you a deeper breadth of understanding if you look back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then discover how you got to where you are now. It makes it more entertaining the more you know about it. At least that was my experience as a fan who became a journalist. So I'm hoping that we can impart that with the WFIA.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to preserve that history, expose new people to the history, newer fans to the history. And there's a lot to embrace with new wrestling too. They're very impressive athletes out there, and there is something for everybody with wrestling even today.
As you said, you don't like about 75% of it, 70%. I agree with you on that, but I will say there's glimmers of greatness today. The women's division in WWE is the healthiest thing to happen to wrestling in 30, 40 years. Because it's not a girly show anymore. They're not a sideshow. They're equal to the men athletically. And they're promoted as athletes as opposed to sex symbols all the time. So now the women have reached the par with the male wrestlers. And I never thought I'd see the day. And I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great.
I agree. The WWE does their women's division correctly. Mm-hmm. And they have some outstanding athletes. And to me, it doesn't even matter that they're women. That's a sidebar.
Oh yeah, you forget that they're women, and I think based on the people I've talked to in and out of the industry, that Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania is the match of the year. Everybody agrees that was a classic, old school fight, and that's really healthy for the industry. And I think whoever is responsible for this, I don't know if it's Fit Finlay or Stephanie McMahon, whoever got the idea to push women the same way they push the men. Hats off, because it's really worked like gangbusters.
I agree. And who's ever doing the in-ring training down there with them in NXT, which I'm not quite sure who that would be at this point. Obviously, they get a high five for me, because these women are trained right. They're safe, and they're just terrific in the ring. And it's a testament to the training program that they have.
Mm-hmm. But like I say, the whole attitude has changed. If you go back to the Attitude Era and what they did with women wrestlers back then, it's a whole different game now. I mean, it was all sex appeal back then. Now it's athleticism. And I kind of like the women's divisions in both leagues, because it's like they fight for the old school reasons. I'm better than you and I want your belt. That's all you needed, right back in the old days.
Right. And people forget that simple formula in pro wrestling. Bob, do you remember when the commentators used to talk about, well, whoever wins this match, there's going to be a hefty purse at the end, and that kind of thing. They treated it like it was a sport. So even if everybody knew it wasn't on the up and up, the presentation sold you into it. Right. It was every match was a big deal, that type of thing. It's easy for us to bash Vince McMahon for, the destruction of the territories and stuff like that. But one thing that I can definitely say is, when you watch the WWF, even the shows where they were just smashing jobbers, right? Mm-hmm. The wrestlers, you thought they were superstars. He made them look like $1 million. You know what I mean? And that was something that I think is missing now, is the sports aspect, this person's a really big deal type thing. It's almost too much of a rush.
Young fans don't understand the psychology of the squash match.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you and I both, you're old enough, or at least I'm way older than you are. But in my day, kids, it wasn't just a squash match; it was a stepping stone match en route to a title opportunity. You would take on a jobber, and then a better wrestler, and then a slightly better wrestler, and then maybe in the East Coast here, I'd call it like I always call it the Dominic DeNucci factor. If you could get past Dominic DeNucci on television, you were next in line for a world championship shot. So they weren't just squashing to do squash matches. And you might have thought they were boring, but they were stepping stones. It's like a sport. You earn your way to a championship. Now, a guy walks over in the microphone and goes, I want a match, get a referee. Or they attack somebody backstage or something to start a feud. And then they get an instant title shot without earning it. In the old days, you had to earn it. And that's what a squash match was.
Yeah,
right? Am I right or wrong? I mean,
you're absolutely right. It was like pro boxing, right? I always say wrestling at its heart kind of mirrored what was going on in pro boxing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had to beat a fighter, had to climb up the line to become a ranked contender for whichever title, whichever weight class he was in. Wrestling was initially treated the exact same way.
Exactly right.
Wrestlers had to winning matches mattered. And then that's how they built themselves up. Well, you remember the old fashioned formula with Hogan in the 80s. It was, they'd bring in these monster heels. They'd smash everybody on television for 2-3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the run with Hogan. Right. It was the same way in the AWA. It was the same way everywhere. It was a time tested and true formula.
That formula went all the way back to Bruno on the East Coast.
Yes.
I mean, that's how it worked. They never really deviated until the end of the 80s, I would say, or in the ECW era began. But yeah, I mean, take Ernie Ladd. It was a great traveling attraction. He worked all over the world, all over the country, right? But when he stepped foot in a new federation or a new organization, I should say, he had to earn his way up. It didn't matter that he was 6'9", bigger than everybody else, and a former NFL great. He had to earn his way to a title shot. And that was that. It didn't matter that he was Ernie Ladd. Everybody in the world knew who he was, but okay, I got to take on this little guy and then a slightly larger guy, and then he would demolish them. But also the squash match and other psychology, it showed you what the guy could do, how strong he was, how fast he was, what holes he knew, what his finisher was. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't just beating a guy up, boring. No, it was to establish who that person was, how mean they were, or how scientific they were if they were a face. What holes they knew or what finishers they had. There was a psychology to all of it, every bit of it.
You're absolutely right. And you hit, a big nail on the head there too with, territories. A wrestler, if he was getting stale somewhere, he could just pack up and go to another territory and get another 6 month to a year run. It was, and it was, again, like you said, it's a similar formula, a similar formula where they'd bring them in, they'd build them up. If they went for a title match, they went for a title match, that type of thing. It was a time tested and proven formula that worked. And we both know that cable television is really what killed the territories. People always.
Yeah. Cable TV was the beginning and the end. Of course, Vince McMahon buying up every name wrestler in the world, even if he wasn't going to use them. He was buying announcers. He was buying wrestlers. He was giving people jobs, which was great. But, poor Vern Gagne, poor Jerry Jarrett, poor, the people who developed these stars just to have them gobbled up by this giant. It got to the point where Jerry Lawler said, well, if I can't beat him, I might as well join him. That was the most shocking wrestler to ever join the World Wrestling Federation was Jerry Lawler to me, because I knew Jerry and he was like, they do this, they do that to us. And I know Jerry Jarrett felt the same way. To see Lawler turn it around like that, I was stunned. I never thought he would join, but I guess it reached that point for everyone.
What year was that, Bob? Was that 93?
That had to be about, oh gosh, I left full time in 92. So I would say it was 91 or 92, that far back.
Okay. And then he continued to run the USWA with Jarrett.
Right. He was still working that, and he was working WWE at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
which is hard to do, but he loved to wrestle. He'd wrestle now if he could. He was always wrestling.
He does again.
Yeah, right. He was wrestling indies. I mean, straight or long. I mean, ageless. I'm hoping by the way, I'm hoping he's feeling good right now. I hope he's doing way better. I understand he is, so I'm really happy about that.
I listened to Jim Ross's podcast a couple of weeks ago. He said he met up with the King.
Yeah.
When AEW was in town, he said the King's doing very well.
That's great. That's great. One of the saddest things for me this year was the loss of Jerry Jarrett. Because again, I look at these losses not as, let's honor him for what he accomplished, but it's more than that. To people like you and me, he's one of the forefathers. He's one of the leaders of the wrestling psychology that you and I grew up with. Every time one of these guys passes on, we lose that. We lose one more voice, one more teacher, one more historian, one more everything. And I want to keep their memories alive because it's like, what would we do without them? The problem with a lot of independent wrestling now, it's being run by people who have no association with real wrestlers and real promoters and real people who know the psychology behind putting on a good card, building a star, building a feud, attracting fans. And we need our old timers because they're going to teach everybody else. I think a healthy thing about AEW is they let somebody like Jake the Snake Roberts in there to talk to all the young guys, and somebody like Tully Blanchard for a while, Arn Anderson. I thought that was great. I thought that attracted fans in the beginning, I think.
I agree. And it was a very smart thing to do. The question still out there was anybody actually listening to them? That's what we hear about. We're the wrestlers listening to them. We heard a quote that Adam Page had apparently said, I don't need to listen to you. I know what I'm doing, type of thing. Do you not? That's I guess that's up to the fans to decide. I'm actually reading Jerry Jarrett's book right now, the one he did with Mark James about 10 years ago. It's terrific. Have you read it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's a slow, detailed style, just like you would expect from Jerry Jarrett. I'm about halfway through it. He shares a lot of his booking philosophies, talks about a lot of his calculated moves in wrestling. He's got a really interesting story about how he came up and got involved with Goulas and Welch, and then how he eventually started his own territory. And it's a terrific book, and I feel the same way when Jerry Jarrett passed. I think Jerry Jarrett hasn't been given the respect in history that he should. And I hate to say it, but I think Bruce Pritchard making fun of him how he did in his podcast may have been part of that, where that horrible impression he always does of Jerry Jarrett. Jarrett was a brilliant guy, and
yes,
he always made money. He was a terrific wrestling promoter, and like I said, I don't feel he gets the respect that he deserves because he was a brilliant mind and knew what he was doing.
But one of the highlights of my whole wrestling career is I spent a week in Memphis once. Jerry Lawler opened up his home and his time for me for an entire week. I couldn't believe it. So I go down there from New York and attended about 2 or 3 shows. Saw Rob Van Dam in some of his earliest matches. But the best part is I got to talk to both Jerry Jarrett and Eric Embry, who was booking at that point. And they would just lay it out to me, the struggles they had staying afloat, trying to remain relevant, trying to remain number one in the area when you had this WWF monster breathing down their necks back then, and it was tougher and tougher as they went along. I mean, it was like you could see the rock becoming an avalanche falling down the hill, and there was nothing they could do about it but fight it as best they could with what they had, local talent, and but the bigger stars, as soon as the young guy got some notice, they were going to get signed by the big boys. So it was really, really tough for them. So I remember Jerry Jarrett going, please give us some articles because we need all the press we can get. This is back when wrestling magazines meant something, obviously. And that's an amazing thing, too, about the wrestling magazines. Bruno Sammartino said it when he accepted his WWF Hall of Fame award, is that he got known worldwide thanks to the magazines. And even into the end of the territory days, the wrestling magazines were still the best way to find out about what's going on over here, who's the new star over there. New people introduced in pictures and in articles. It was still the way to go until the end of the territories. When everything congealed, when everything got homogenized into just a couple of companies, the indies were really indie. I mean, really, really small. ECW was the best or most popular indie, and they even got national TV based on what they did. But everybody else around 93, 94 started going away one by one. Even Smoky Mountain met its demise. And I think that's what changed everything. I think the fact that there was no territory system. You either watch this show or that show, meaning WCW or WWF. That was it for the wrestling magazines. That's what helped kill them as well as the internet. Let's be honest. But it wasn't the Dave Meltzers of the world and the Wade Kellers. No, it was the homogenization of everybody into two places to work, and that was it.
Yeah. There was a lot of factors, and you nailed two of them right there. It was the mega companies that were gobbling up every piece of talent.
Yeah,
and then I agree that the internet is what severely hurt the wrestling magazines. I think I started reading wrestling magazines in about '89. And it was cool to learn about everything else that was going around in the country at the time. And I can remember I got back into wrestling in like '96. And, I picked up reading PWI and whatever I get my hands on. Now I was going, wait a second. These are a month behind now. I can go on the internet, So yeah, it's two factors that led to the demise. Yeah. And,
well,
there was always independent wrestling, and there always will be independent wrestling, but it's nothing like it used to be where you had a full-on territory.
Yeah. Well, else the problem is too. It's not just wrestling. Anything on paper, people learn to pick up their phone and get the headlines and read the news. They don't want to pay for information now. They don't want to pay for any information. So it's killing off all different kinds of news gathering and sports writing. I remained in publishing until, believe it or not, April of 2021. I was still working for an entertainment. We did little sports. And it was like a Village Voice style giveaway paper in Long Island called Good Times. I worked for them for 17 years, but a road. I mean, everything was going web. Had to have a web edition. Had to do this. Had to do that because people won't even pick up a free newspaper now. Add to that the price of a piece of copy paper is through the roof. So people are entirely different with how they consume information, which makes your newsletter perfect because it's still a newsletter. It's still got that vibe, but it's available to the fans electronically. And that's how they go around and look at everything now. And you just saw that Dave Meltzer just stopped printing for the first time.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, the Wrestling Observer is now, as of officially pretty soon, no more print copies through the mail. You have to get it digitally. There's just no call for it anymore.
Yeah,
it was probably costing them to put that out rather than making a profit on it. Seriously,
that's the truth. When we first started doing Wrestling Fan News, I offered print copies for the first 3 editions, and I mean it was expensive. It was really expensive to get those printed. And the scary part was too that it was like the printers didn't know how to print a magazine anymore. It was. I'm trying to explain to them what I need done, and oh yeah, no problem. And here I pick it up, and they messed up the cover and the back page, and it was kind of scary. But I guess that's all just going to the wayside. And you're right, it's all going digital. So I think the last issue was the first one we stopped offering print wise, and everything is digital now for Wrestling Fan News. And yeah, I guess it's just the way of the world. Me personally, I still have a newspaper subscription. I like picking up a magazine. I still like picking up a book. I'll never get used to that flashing light thing in front of my face.
Even I have acquiesced. As long as I've been in print publishing, like I say, through 2021. Now, I still support print publications, but digitally.
Sure.
I get the New York Times digitally. I have a subscription to a company called Readly, I think it's called, out of England, where you can read full-on magazines digital style. In other words, I'm reading the magazine, but I'm reading it on a tablet or on a computer. It's the same thing. I want to continue to support people who make magazines and newspapers. I really do, because that's how I made my living for most of my adult life. So it's like I want to continue to support news gathering because I think it's important. It's important for wrestling. It's important for sports. It's important for local news too. I mean, what would you do without a local newspaper? organization. If you don't cover people, they're going to do whatever they want. You know what I'm saying? That's how bad stuff happens. So I don't want to be political, but I think news is important. I think sports coverage is important as well. And I think the way you're handling it with the WFIA is just spot on, because it's like the old flavor, the new flavor, accessible to everybody, and featured some really talented writers. The first newsletter I saw was like, you had George Shire, you had Dave Brzezinski, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the writing quality is like off the charts, man. It's a nice job.
Well, thanks a lot, Bob. I appreciate it. I'm an amateur editor. never been formally trained, but I do my best. I actually wrote a book myself a couple of years ago, and the lady I worked with, I learned a ton from with editing. She had edited about 3 or 4 books, and I learned a lot. So I've been able to use that with Wrestling Fan News, and because you know how it goes, you were an editor. You know what people turn in sometimes. You gotta. Might have taken them 40 minutes to write the article. It's going to take you an hour and a half to go through it. It's a painstaking effort.
The second half of my career, I was more of an editor than a writer. And I really liked that part of the job, which was just take a bunch of stuff and make a publication out of it. From the editing to the, all of it. I even laid out pages late in my career. I didn't care. I just wanted to stick with print publishing, hanging on by my fingernails. And yeah, I mean, it's a skill that I'm afraid it's not even needed anymore. With AI and everything else, you're going to have computers writing these things soon. But that's synthetic. We need people who know wrestling. We need people who've lived it, like Dave Brzezinski and George Shire. You can't get the vibe from it unless you're with the people who were there. And for it's the same thing. You guys have been involved with it. It's different than telling a computer to say, write an article up about, Judgment Day or whatever. No, you need people who are in the business to know the business, I think.
Right. And with writing, especially with wrestling writing, you always have to make people feel. And that's the biggest thing with wrestling, is we all remember the way wrestling made us feel. You might not remember exactly where you were when you saw it. You might not even remember exactly who you were with, but you remember how it made you feel. I remember, I think it was 1988. Yes, it was March of 1988, I think. I can remember watching when Ron Bass took that spur to Brutus Beefcake's head.
Right.
And I remember being, as a kid, and being horrified watching that. And wrestling makes you feel. That's the whole thing with wrestling, is it draws an emotion out of you. And so that's a goal of ours when we write, all of us that are contributing to it, is you want to convey that emotion, and you want the reader to feel that emotion also. And I think we keep getting better every issue with Wrestling Fan News. And I think this whole thing is just going to continue to expand and get better and better. And it's just a great organization with great people. And, right now we kind of have a blank canvas, and we can continue, rebuilding this organization into something special. And every organization, you have to have an organ. You have to have a voice, and Wrestling Fan News is ours. And like I said, I've gone to great lengths to try to make it look and feel exactly like that magazine you read in the 70s. And it sounds like it's working, Bob.
No, it's working for somebody like me anyway. And it's obviously working for a lot of people. How's it been going? Is membership growing? Are people joining that you wouldn't have expected to see growing? How is it going? Let's say the last 6 months or so, because you just started. So the last 6 months, what has it been like?
Well, our Facebook page is booming. We just broke 900 members on our Facebook page.
Nice.
And if somebody would have told me in March that we'd be at 900 members 8 months later, I wouldn't have believed them. And it continues to explode. And it's not bots either. It's real people. And some heavyweight names. Some heavyweight names are on there. As far as the free membership, which to me is the easiest thing in the world, it's totally free. And then you get a free digital subscription to Wrestling Fan News,
Mhm.
we have cracked a few hundred. So we're getting about 30% of what's on Facebook actually signs up for the club. But again, it's far surpassed my expectations. Starting something like that, I didn't think it would go this strong, but it has, and it continues to grow. And I think the sky's the limit. And if you talk to the old timer WFIA members, I've asked Tom Burke, I've asked Dave Brzezinski, I've asked George Shire. I said, what was the numbers like back then in the '70s with the WFIA? And all three of them said we don't think it was more than 200 or 300 members at a time. So hey, we've accomplished that now, and we're back to that number. And again, I think the sky's the limit, and stuff like what you're doing, this great stuff that you're doing with these shows, is just going to help the exposure and help it continue to grow.
I really wanted you on this show. I really did, because it's like, I hope you're prepared for thousands of members. I really am, and I'm not being facetious. I think there's a crying need for what you're doing. An independent voice that's bringing people together from all types of wrestling and different eras of wrestling, simply because people love it. There's no agenda. There's only one agenda. We all really like this stuff, right? And I think the simplicity of it is going to be your calling card. And I think that the more the word gets around, there's no reason not to join the WFIA. What's the reason? Certainly the price is right. There's no membership fee, at least at this point. Why would you not join the WFIA? And I'm going to tell my listeners that there is no reason not to join the WFIA. You'll get the newsletter. There's a Facebook group like Brad talked about. It's all enjoyable. All different topics are broached. And if you like either old school or new school wrestling, there's no caste system. Welcome, right?
The WFIA is for everybody, and it always has been that way all the way back to 1967 when it was founded. It's for everybody. Pro wrestling is for everybody. So, check us out. Check out our Facebook page. Stop by, have fun, join in the conversations we're having. And we have some big things coming. We announced our first convention for September of 2024. It's going to be a digital convention, and we're just starting to lay down the framework for it. But I think it's going to be an exciting event, and we have some really good ideas for it.
It sounds different too. I'm really looking forward to that as well. I guarantee I'll be at least checking in on that. That's for sure, because it's like, I want to see this be a long lasting. There's a crying need for the WFIA or something like it. People, like you say, people are fragmented. Bring them together. Bring them together. I mean, it's like we're too fragmented in this country now. We need a commonality. We need something to bring us together like this. Wrestling has a history of bringing people together. Detroit in the 70s was on fire, but the Sheik had to be stopped. And people from all walks of life would go to the Cobo Arena to see him get beat. And everybody in the arena were friends because they all had a commonality wanting to see the Sheik get beat. I know that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what happened in Detroit. I mean, I think Dave Brzezinski and Terry Sullivan wrote an article together or on YouTube. I think it's how the Sheik saved Detroit, because there was such strife, racial relations and everything back then, that they needed diversions. And thank God for the 1968 Detroit Tigers, who were a winning baseball team that went to the World Series. And thank the heavens for the Sheik, because everybody hated him. Everybody could get together and hate the Sheik, because it was all good guy, bad guy back then. So that type of vibe, we all have our differences in the United States now, but you know what? Maybe we can all get together and enjoy some good wrestling, get some good wrestling talk, some nostalgia, the whole 9 yards.
I agree. And that's exactly what we're doing with the WFIA. And, again, it's for everybody. You like the new stuff? Great. You like the old stuff? Great. Maybe you like something that the rest of us haven't been exposed to yet. Maybe there's European or Japanese wrestling that, you'd like to share with us and we could get into and enjoy. And again, the organization, the comeback is so young yet. There's a lot of really good stuff to come, and it's going to continue with the WFA. It's a great organization, and thanks to people like you, we continue to grow. and it's just a very positive thing in wrestling when we need a positive thing in wrestling.
Well, Brad, here's the big question: you having fun?
Oh, it's a blast! It's an
Mm-hmm.
absolute blast.
Mm-hmm.
We're very organized. Like I said, we have our monthly board meetings, and then we also have several committees, and we also have committee meetings, and we can't wait to get together and chat with each other, and it's a lot of fun. And some people have posted some great stuff on the Facebook page that I didn't even know existed. Some of this, so it's fantastic just connecting with all these people, and I'm having a blast. I know you're having a blast with it, and it's a lot of fun across the board.
It is amazing what you can learn about wrestling from somebody you don't even know. I mean, somebody will post something like on your Facebook group, or somebody will write to me and tell me something, or send me a direct message. I'm like, I didn't know that. It's amazing the anecdotes and history that when we all get together, we can learn from each other about this angle, or this guy did that, or this guy was somebody else in another territory. I didn't know that. That type of thing. It's
Right.
phenomenal how much information there is that can be passed along through this, through this method.
And I think what's terrific now too, one of the big positives of the information age that we're in is people are making websites, people are writing articles, people are writing books. You can access this stuff and learn. So hopefully this history is not going to get lost because it's accessible now. I do a lot of research myself, and it's out there. If you look for it for wrestling, it's out there. You can find it. Mark James has done some great contributions with his books. George Shire with his history of Minnesota wrestling book is terrific. People are doing really good things out there, and it's a cool time to really get to learn a lot about wrestling.
So here's your chance. Tell everybody how to get involved, specifically where to log on, who to write, how to join the WFIA.
Sure. The best thing to do, the easiest thing to do, is you can go to our website, thewfia.org. That's THEWFIA.org. You can also check out our Facebook page. If you just go on Facebook and do a search, just type in Wrestling Fans International Association, you'll see that awesome logo, that classic logo, and you can click on it and bring up our page. If you're looking to get a hold of me personally, my information's on the website. My information's on the Facebook page. I also have my own website, braddrake.net. You can check that out if you want. Another way to get in contact with me. And we also have a phone number. If you're old school and you want to give a call and you want to talk about wrestling, if you want to talk about the WFIA, you can call us at 815-290-9087.
There you go. I don't know what else to say other than I think this is the healthiest thing of 2023 for pro wrestling industry. I think this is a really good thing and a big deal. I think you've really just it's the infancy because it's going to grow and grow and grow and grow. I can feel it in my bones because you know what? There's nothing not to like about this. It's really, oh gosh, I'm reading the tributes that George wrote to Terry Funk, and she got an LKC in the last newsletter you guys put out, and I'm like, I can't get this information anywhere else.
Right.
And so even as a casual fan, who would not want to read the histories of those two great guys?
You're absolutely right. And when we had that last issue, I wanted to make sure that we had something in there for LKC and Funk. George was the man. I contacted George,
Yeah,
and he did it. He did a terrific job with both of them.
He's tireless. I don't know how he does all he does, and he's no spring chicken. I'm not either, but it's like I don't know guys like him and Bill Apter. I don't know how they're still doing it. It's incredible. Bill is 78, and he just had a birthday. We just both had a birthday in October. He's still out there doing it. I mean, and not slowing down in the least. So hats off to those guys, man. It's like phenomenal. But we need their voices. We need these veteran journalists to keep it up because it's like, how else are we going to learn about this stuff?
You're absolutely right, and I think the trick for those guys, Bob, is never stop. Just keep doing it.
I talked to Bill a few years ago. Bill Apter. I said, you got to retire. He says, I'm never retiring. That was it. It's not even in the discussion. He loves it so much, and as long as you love it, keep doing it, man. Did you see him at one of the WWF? I think it was WrestleMania press conference afterwards, and he was there, and both Triple H and Cody Rhodes gave him a shout out.
That's terrific.
They went, Bill Apter? Because he's like 4 generations younger than everybody else that was there as a reporter, right? And they went, Bill Apter. They went, I don't believe it. They're both of them. And they gave him a nice, everybody applauded for Bill Apter. And at one point they gave him a stamp because everybody knows who he is. Even the kids know who Bill Apter is. So it's like, I found it to be very heartening. And that's the vibe the WFIA has. We're here to applaud people like George Shire and Tom Burke and all these other people who have meant so much to all of us all these decades. And the magazines we've saved in a drawer somewhere for generations that we still look at on occasion, the yellow dog-eared pages of these great wrestling magazines that we all our favorite ones that we kept, and it's in a storage bin somewhere, but we still have it. We want to say thanks to all these folks. I mean, it's really important. I mean, these are the people that really entertained us for years.
Right, and they're just endless wealths of knowledge, and it's terrific. It's an honor for me, really, to get to work with these guys and to get some of that wealth and information and to put together a publication that they're willing to contribute to. It really is an honor because it's terrific work that they do, and it's very important. Like we've talked about, you don't want to lose this history. And they're doing a great job of keeping everybody informed still.
Well, Brad, I am a card-carrying member of the WFIA, and I'm proud of it. And I'm telling you what, I'm going to mention it a lot on this podcast. I promise you that. I'm not blowing smoke at you. I just am excited about it. I'm having fun with it. And I think a lot of other people will too. So I want to thank you profusely for being here. I've been trying to get you on here for a long time, and I'm very grateful that you appeared. Thanks so much.
Well, I thank you, Bob, for having me, and I appreciate all that you're doing for wrestling and how you're keeping the history of wrestling alive with what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our discussion with Mr. Brad Drake. You know, one of the reasons I put this show together is I have so many good memories of professional wrestling, both working in the business with the PWI companies and with my other wrestling magazines, but also as just a fan growing up and, watching wrestling as a kid. I want to just take a moment here and pay tribute to a bunch of stars who I think were vastly underrated. And they don't get to play these days that they really deserve. They all deserve to be remembered. Most of them are still around. And, I just want to give them a little hype. Remember Randy Rose? A really good, really smooth wrestler. Mainly a heel in his career. I know, he worked as a face for a little bit at the tail end, but most people know him best as a member of what originally was a faction called the Midnight Express. It was a faction before it was known as a tag team by that name. Of course, later, Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose ended up in the AWA under the tutelage of Paul E. Dangerously and won the AWA World Tag Team Championship in the 80s. But in the beginning, it was part of the Midnight Express faction with a bunch of people. But he eventually ended up teaming with Dennis Condrey, and they were a great team. And he was a good wrestler. Smooth as silk in the ring, a no-nonsense guy, could offer anything a match needed at any time. He's about 6'2" and about 240 pounds, and just smooth as silk. I thought he was smooth, just a really good wrestler, underrated, good talker too. Whatever they asked him to do, he did it well. So I just want to tip my cap to him. He's still with us these days, thankfully. And I also want to tip his cap to him because he did a lot of great work for charity, using his fame as a wrestler to parlay that into raising money for people who really needed it. I remember seeing him on the old Joe Pedicino all-night wrestling block talking about charity work he was doing in the Georgia area. So I'm saying 3 cheers for Randy Rose. He was a really good hand and one of the people who made wrestling what it was. Back in his prime in the 1980s. Gene Ligon, NWA fans, certainly you remember him. Mid-Atlantic fans all over the middle of the country. Gene Ligon, or Gene Ligon, I think he was pronounced. But he was all over the place, and he was really good. I mean, he was a member of the Thunderfoots tag team, as managed briefly by Paul Jones. He also, did a lot of, well, to be honest with you, enhancement work on television, but the greatest announcers in the world all knew who Gene Ligon was. Another really smooth wrestler, good-looking guy, and later in his career, he actually became an announcer and did color commentary on wrestling TV programs. But he was a tremendous talent. I thought he was really good. I got to meet him when, for some reason, the Thunder Feet, for lack of a better term, were passing through the New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey area, and I got to attend a couple of independent cards with the Thunderfoots on the show. And I'm watching them in the ring, and I'm going, wow, these guys are really good. And I'm in the backstage area afterwards, and I said, congratulations on your match. That was great. And he was down. He said, no, we didn't. I didn't have a good night tonight. I said, if you had a bad night, I didn't see it. And I really meant that way. He was a real professional. I hold this man in as high regard as Ric Flair or Terry Funk or anybody who laced up a pair of boots. Gene Ligon could go. And ask any other wrestler who was around in that period of time, they'll tell you Gene Ligon could go. And that's why he had such a nice long career on television, because he could work with anyone. Obviously, he could take punishment too, or make it look like he was taking punishment. Guys like Gene were the backbone of the professional wrestling industry from the 70s through the 90s. The sport wouldn't be able to exist without those who were willing to, well, lose. But he always looked good when he was doing it, so hats off to this ultra-professional, and I really hope that fans remember him, because I certainly do. He really left an impression on me as both a really good guy and a really talented wrestler. Jose Estrada was the jobber. Well, maybe. I don't like using that word. I don't even like enhancement talent. He was a wrestler. Did you know that he was actually the World Wrestling Federation's junior heavyweight champion for a spell? He really was. I think Tatsumi Fujinami beat him for that belt. I'm not even going to look that up. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I was there that night too, in Madison Square Garden. I also have really fond memories of Jose teaming with Johnny Rodz. I was under the mental impression that Johnny Rodz trained Jose Estrada. I'm probably wrong about that, but I know they teamed up together a lot. And I also remember, and you may not believe this, Estrada and Johnny Rodz beat the team of Tony Gurria and Steve Travis in Philadelphia at the Spectrum. That's right. The guys who routinely would be used to put over face teams on television got a big win in Philly. And of course, Jose was also a member of the Conquistadors, which got a minor push in the 1980s. And he did a lot of work in the World Wrestling Council. Had a son who went on to become a wrestler. Another one who, just like Johnny Rodz, was really, really outstanding in the ring. Never wrestled a bad match in his life. I know his role in a lot of situations was to put someone else over. Again, smooth as silk, deceivingly strong. He was a tad smaller than Johnny Rodz, but he was every bit as athletic and fast, really fast in the ring. All I know is when you saw either Johnny Rodz or Jose Estrada in a WWF ring, you knew you were in for a good match, no matter who the opponent was. And they also both worked the faces from time to time. I remember Jose Estrada against Baron Mikel Cicluna for some reason. And a few weeks later on television, of course, they were teaming against somebody else. But those were the days when you actually grew very, very fond of the so-called enhancement talent. And I remain fond to this day of Jose Estrada. Never wrestled a bad match in his life. Late in his career, Vince McMahon called Sweet Hansen raw-boned. And he used to call Baron Cicluna raw-boned, right? But also Sweet Hansen, big raw-boned Sweet Hansen. Southern man, I'll tell you what. I don't care if it was during his blonde phase or his late phase. Sweet Hansen had the most killer-looking backbreaker. You know, the one where you kind of semi-scoop up the guy and then smash him over your leg? His looked particularly real. Hansen, to a lot of people, is best known as the tag team partner of Rip Hawk, both blonde hair at that point, although Swede towered over Rip Hawk. And they were a villainous tag team that later, around 1975, split up and had a bloody feud that was, I guess it was a major feud in about 2 different territories at that point. A real blood feud. I remember the bloody covers in the London wrestling magazines about that feud. But Sweden was big and strong, never fast. He was an old school heel. Pound him into submission and hit him with a backbreaker or something else before you scored the pin. That was good enough in those days. And he had an odd charisma. It always looked like he never got any sleep. He used to have these bags under his eyes, kind of a dark complexion around the eyes. But T-U-F-F, tough. When they brought him into the World Wrestling Federation late in his career, he started as a heel and got a couple shots against Bob Backlund. And later, they kind of turned him face after he was a referee in a match between Backlund and superstar Billy Graham. The referee, Hansen, and Graham got into a tiff afterwards. And Hansen slugged Graham and knocked him to the mat with one punch. Now, I thought that would be the start of a big babyface push for Sweet Hansen, but no. I think they came back to the Garden and Graham beat him. But he was kind of sort of a face/heel after that point. Didn't last there much longer. But I was impressed with him. And the more I learned about his past, the more impressed I got. Sweet Hansen was a major star. Don't let those losses on those YouTube matches fool you. Big, raw bone, Sweet Hansen. I can't get that word out of my head right now, raw bone. So as long as we're talking about underrated Sweet Hansen, let's talk about underrated Rip Hawk, his tag team partner. For some reason, they called him the Profile. And he would stand, he'd stand in the ring and put his head out to the left or right, and you could see his profile, which was not all that remarkable. But he was another blonde-haired, he wasn't even a body beautiful. I don't know how to describe him. He was ruggedly tough. Not the tallest guy in the world, but he didn't need to be because he was just, he was a smasher and a gouger and a puncher, and that was Rip Hawk. He's best known to some modern fans because he was part of an early team with Ric Flair. Rip Hawk, Ric Flair, around 1975. And it was really probably one of Flair's first successful programs. Other fans remember Rip Hawk from the IWA. Again, Rip the Profile Hawk. I still don't get it. I don't understand how he ended up with that moniker, but he had a sleeper hold. He was a really good, really rough heel. And he could talk. And you know what? He's one of those guys who looked like he wasn't fooling around. There was a lot of guys like that in the era. Rip Hawk, Lars Anderson, or Larry Heineme, whatever you prefer. I guess one is Diet. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? There were just these big, strong, tough guys that went in and decimated their opponents and got out of there. They would always beat them down with a variety of holds, if not just, forearm smashes and outright punching back in those days. Bulldog Brower, these guys who made it look real. Rip Hawk always made it look real. There's no question about that in my mind. And again, the Sweet Hansen, Rip Hawk, Blonde Bombers tag team. Now, across the wrestling world, there's a bunch of Blonde Bombers. But I got to give them credit. I think Hansen and Hawk were the first Blonde Bombers and deserved to be. They were a major draw. Everybody hated them. They were so rough and tough and mean. Boy, do I miss those days. I'm sorry. I miss the big, tough, slow-moving bruisers. And, of course, I also miss Dick the Bruiser. All right, time for the old boy to raise some hackles. To me, one of the 5 most underrated wrestlers ever was Chief Jay Strongbow, a guy who gets more bad press than I've had hot dinners. I don't care about that stuff. When in his agent years, he's a road agent and stuff, late in his career at the arenas and stuff like that. I am talking just freshly name changed from Joe Scarpa to Chief Jay Strongbow in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in 71, 72, 73. Jay Strongbow, from the minute he walked in there, was white hot. Easily the number 2 babyface for about 2 years in the WWF. You can look it up. He would main event B shows. He was hugely over. He had a very strange style. The war dance. They'd bust him open on TV every 10 weeks, and he'd scream and holler and cry, and very emotional guy. Don't pluck his feathers like Ernie Ladd did, or he'll go off. completely original personality, but when you got him mad, he turned into a wild man, and it was fascinating to watch. Great interview because he was a bad interview. You know why? Because it looked real. He was very humble until he was fouled by somebody. Then he would practically threaten to kill him during the interviews. He would change entirely. He was OVER and deserved to be. That's the point I'm trying to make here. He was actually pretty fast afoot. His war dance, the chops, the knee lifts, and he had a sleeper hold. And that was his finish for a long time. Later, he replaced that with this, I'll be honest, very weak-looking double chop to the throat, it never went over. I prefer to remember the earlier Jay Strongbow and his feuds with Buddy Wolf. Great feud with Freddie Blassie. Another one in Georgia with Ernie Ladd. Greg Valentine, Ken Patera. The betrayal of Jimmy Valiant, who turned on Strongbow. Another feud with Billy Graham. Another feud with Baron Mikel Ciclune in 72 when Sonny King and Chief Jay Strongbow defeated King Curtis and Baron Ciclune for the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championships in 1972. So there was a feud between all four of them. It went on for about 6 months. Depending on the arena, they would even main event. Chief Jay Strongbow was it. If you go into the 80s, I thought the number 2 face, only because they wouldn't let him be champion in the WWF, was Jimmy Snuka, right? Just over as heck, could main event or be a co-main event, and it was always over. It was the same way with Strongbow in the early 70s. Now, I admit, Strongbow hung around for a long time. You know, you go into the 80s with the Strongbow Brothers tag team was the beginning of the downfall, really, in terms of his quality work in the ring. And he stuck around a little bit too long. I think he stuck around until about 84. But in his prime, when he first started out, Chief Jay Strongbow was it on the East Coast. I am telling you. I don't care that some people don't like him. I don't care that he wasn't that great in the 80s. Prime Strongbow was an attraction. People lined up to buy tickets to watch him in those feuds. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He was over, kids. As much as you can be over. I insist. I'm sure I'm going to get some flack for this one, but I was there. That's the difference. I was there in that era, and I'm telling you, Chief Jay Strongbow is probably one of the 10 most popular stars in the WWF era. Case closed. Podcasting, ladies and gentlemen, podcasting. It's a Ferris wheel of delight, although I feel more like a hamster on a wheel, if you know what I mean. This is the second time I'm recording the outro, as I call it, to the show because, well, I was going to take a week off at the end of November, but I've opted not to do it because guests keep falling out of the woodwork. And I'm interviewing them in a relatively short period of time, and we'll be able to fill the month with entertainment for you all. So I'm happy about that. I hope you continue to tune in each and every week. It's great to have Brad Drake on the show. Really wish him all the luck in the world with the WFIA. I don't think he needs luck. I think this is a no-brainer grand slam. I really do. If you're a wrestling fan, there's no reason not to join the Wrestling Fans International Association. They're taking it seriously. The price is right, too. So go ahead and do it. I think you should. Anyway, I'm about to mosey on down the road from this particular episode. We hope you enjoyed both Brad and the look at some underrated stars. Our theme song is Hold On a Sec, performed by the great guitarist Brian Teo. Some of the incidental music that you hear in the backgrounds was performed by Kevin MacLeod, New York area musician who's a real, I don't know how to put it. You hear his music in TV and radio and podcasts, film. He's got it all going on. Kevin MacLeod, a one-of-a-kind guy. Our website, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Every one of our shows is there in case you don't feel like listening to an app. You can listen to it right off the website. And it's at the website where you can learn all about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. For a nominal fee, You can help perpetuate the production of the show and take part in Zoom meetings, win some prizes, all kinds of things. And how do you do it? OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. You can also write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. That's outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Facebook, I'm Bob Smith. Singing with BB King on the lead page in case you confuse me with other Bob Smiths. There may be a couple. I've been told anyway. We have a lot coming up in the weeks and months ahead. Stick with us. The best is yet to come. I am convinced. I want to thank Brad Drake, and most of all, I want to thank you for listening to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We publish every Friday. We hope you come back next Friday. And the one after that. Hopefully the one after that. And you know what I hope even more than that? That you're healthy and well, and there's peace with you and your family and all your friends. Because isn't that what it's really all about?